One of my favorite things about 2020 is timing. The Hugo Award-nominated novel telling us about Uncle Ted's life and work was released at the time that the fewest people in the place most interested in its contents would even notice. The anniversary of Pacamama came and went at the same time that Fratelli Tutti was released. And now we have this. Cardinal Cupich, who I have jokingly called a friend of this channel in the past due to how often I covered him, has decided at the same time that the Uncle Ted novel was being talked about to praise Cardinal Joseph Bernardin. There's a certain poetry to that, and I think we'll go over that today because we haven't checked in with our old friend Cardinal Blaise Cupich in quite some time, and Cardinal Joseph Bernardin is a name you should be familiar with. Now, these kind of oddly timed statements happen where they usually do, on Twitter and Facebook. On Saturday, November 14th, Cupich took to Twitter and Facebook to honor the memory of his predecessor in Chicago, the late Cardinal Joseph Bernardin. Yes, that Bernardin, the one that Malachi Martin, Michael Voris, and numerous others have spoken about at length, and his rather novel history, we'll say. Not only was Bernardin the James Martin of his day, but if Malachi Martin is to be believed, he is the most talked about character in his novel Windswept House. More on that in a moment. But Cardinal Cupich took to Twitter and Facebook accounts to sing his praises for his consistent ethic and servant leadership, saying it was as relevant today as it was in his time. Fascinating, really, and the timing is about as perfect as could be imagined due to the Vatican's release about the life and, shall we say, work of Uncle Ted, the former Cardinal Archbishop who had been in talks to continue Bernardin's legacy in Chicago. Yeah, that actually nearly happened, according to the Vatican's new Hugo Award-nominated novel about Ted. And in that regard, I actually do believe that he was in the running to replace Cardinal Bernardin in Chicago in the 1990s. I bring up the timing about this because I have to ask, did Cardinal Cupich actually read the novel released about Uncle Ted? Because if he had, he would see that there was a well-established relationship between the two of them that talked about Ted's work, and how Bernardin would write to let him know whenever he received worrying correspondence from the laity of either his diocese or Ted's diocese regarding him, which did happen, as the novel does attest with some examples. Yet in the land of the Cupiches and the rest, Bernardin is a hero, with few equal to him. Why? For a number of reasons, really. He was an affable, charming prelate who was well loved by the faithful and by the wider world. And most importantly, he developed a seamless garment concept that has been adopted by virtually the entire hierarchy of the Church in North America and Europe. That position is something that I'll go over in a minute, but just know that for the moment, the seamless garment was something that opened the door for the Church to work tirelessly as an arm of Caesar, to accept his pieces of silver, and to do his work in the name of the corporal works of mercy. Typically, people emphasize the seamless garment as allowing Catholics to achieve becoming Caesar themselves, which is true, but in reality, it opened the door for the Church to partner with Caesar in areas that, according to the social doctrine of the Church, rightfully belong to the Church, not to Caesar. But we permit Caesar to take the lead because we like his silver and his pomp, and in our hearts we believe as Catholics that Caesar has preeminence over the Church. Many will reject that notion, and rightfully so, but in practice that is how things are done in the Church, and it explains why no meaningful opposition to Moloch comes from the hierarchy at this time. To do so would be to cross Caesar. This also explains why the bishops are eager to go along with Caesar when the discussion turns to access to the Mass in our present situation. There is a certain cloud over all of this, and that cloud is diabolic in nature. Few are eager or ready to admit that if Malachi Martin was right about the events depicted in his, technically speaking, work of fiction, then there are bigger issues in the Church than anything we've considered as of yet, and they explain virtually everything going on in the Church since the early days of the Council. Much of the work was done by Bernardin himself. If John the 23rd called for the windows of the Church to be open to the world, then it was Cardinal Bernardin who, in North America, who would help open those windows far wider than was advisable and probably intended by the Pope, allowing the winds to sweep the house of the hierarchy on this continent. Yes, in Malachi Martin's Windswept House, it was Cardinal Bernardin who betrayed in the start of the novel in the scene that is right out of central casting. It is him. There is, in fact, a document you can find online that has all the names of every character in that book and who they are represented by in real life. And in that novel, that character is later called Cardinal Leonardin, in a not terribly subtly renaming of him, and in the novel he is receiving the viaticum, including confession, where what is depicted in that scene is made known to the novel's protagonists. In a way that is in no way coincidental, in real life, Cardinal Bernardin passed at the same time that the novel was in its earliest developments, and strange stories always swirled around him, including ones akin to what was described in Windswept House. If you haven't read that, I do recommend doing so, but first, read Malachi Martin's novel, Vatican, which sets the stage for the events in Windswept House, and honestly, Windswept House isn't really even about that event. It's just important to the actual events going on in that book, and in 2020, Windswept House is incredibly prescient. Both are required reading for getting the insider's view of what was going on in the church and its role in the world today in the latter half of the 20th century, including the influence of Cardinal Bernardin. The seamless garment is a theory of Catholic social teaching developed by Cardinal Bernardin. It posits that the Moloch question must be placed on the same level as the rest of the social doctrine of the Church, framed in the Catholic response in what they call a consistent ethic. The Catholic website adopts this position and explains it. It begins with a quote from Cardinal Leonardin, and I'll paraphrase what they're saying. The seamless garment is the idea that states that we must be equally visible in addressing the typical social ills that the Church calls us to work against and put them on the same footing as the Moloch question and functionally provide support for one particular vision of Caesar. It is remarkable. The seamless garment puts anything that comes to mind on the same footing as the Moloch topic, and it does so in such a way that provides all that is needed for Caesar to continue his work that has turned the city of man into the city of Satan. It is an insidious position, one that has gained wide acceptance in the hierarchy, as seen by Francis's recent statements about all manner of these subjects. The result is that the city of God on earth, the Church, becomes nearly indistinguishable from the city of man. And what has happened to the city of man? Thankfully, Cardinal Cupich received what we'll call the classical fraternal correction on Twitter for what he said. That correction was filled with the sentiments and tones you might expect. Instead, I'm going to offer some words from Archbishop Fulton Sheen on the subject. He once warned that if the Church adopted the mood of the current age, then the Church would be alone in the next age. It's something to consider, as the moods of the age are ever shifting and always changing, to such a degree that when the prelates speak, they make less and less sense on issues of any salience in the moment. Many will not accept that, but consider what we've all witnessed from them in 2020, and how they've handled a unique time in history, how they've completely fumbled in ways that would make the Church Fathers apoplectic. Bernardin was at the center of all that, not in 2020, obviously, but in previous years. He helped set the stage for it. He and a handful of other prelates and bishops, who in the 1960s and 1970s and 80s were responsible for reframing the social doctrines of the Church in ways that made Caesar smile. All at the same time that the events described by Malachi Martin in Windswept House were to have occurred. Something to consider. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. And thanks to the supporters of this channel, it is greatly appreciated. And please pray for the Church. Thanks for listening. I am Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.